In the quiet, sprawling landscape of eastern North Carolina, where pine forests met distant, whispering coastlines, a young Marine, Kyle O'Connor, vanished from Camp Lejeune. The official pronouncements were swift, almost too swift. A simple case of desertion during a period of authorized leave. For the military, the file was closed, another statistic in a long ledger of personnel movements. But for his family, especially his younger sister Maggie, the file remained agonizingly open, a gaping wound in their lives that time, despite its relentless march, had failed to heal. 8 years later, the forgotten would be violently disinterred. During a routine demolition of a cluster of dilapidated storage hangars on the sprawling base, construction crews stumbled upon something unspeakable, a discovery that would rip open old wounds and unearth a truth far more terrifying than anyone could have imagined. Stay with us until the very end of this video to uncover the shocking truth behind Kyle O'Connor's disappearance. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more gripping stories. And tell us in the comments below, where are you watching from? 8 years had passed since the world tilted on its axis for Maggie O'Connor, since the last thread connecting her to her older brother Kyle had frayed and snapped. She lived now in a quiet rhythm, a carefully constructed normalcy in a small, unassuming North Carolina town, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the biggest news was usually about the high school football team. Her days unfolded with a monotonous precision, punctuated by the rhythmic click of her keyboard at the local accounting firm, a world of spreadsheets and tax codes that offered a deceptive sense of order. She was good at it, this meticulous balancing of numbers, a stark contrast to the chaotic imbalance that had consumed her personal life. The scent of stale coffee and printer toner clung to the air in her cubicle, a comfort in its predictability. Every evening she drove the familiar route home, past the quaint Main Street, with its flickering neon signs and the aging water tower that stood like a silent sentinel over their community. The small, neat house she shared with the ghosts of her past was always quiet, sometimes suffocatingly so. She'd tried to fill it with new furniture, new hobbies, even a new timid optimism. But the silence always returned, a constant reminder of the brother who should have been there. The loss wasn't a sharp, agonizing pain anymore. It was a dull ache, a phantom limb she constantly reached for, a shadow that stretched long and cold across every bright moment. Kyle's absence wasn't just a space in their family, it was a void in her very soul. She'd learned to live with it, to function, to smile, even to laugh. But the echoes of his boisterous laugh, the memory of his protective hand on her shoulder, lingered in the quiet corners of her mind, refusing to be silenced. The late afternoon sun, typically a golden, comforting presence in the autumn, seemed to cast longer, more ominous shadows as it began its descent. Maggie was just clearing her desk, the faint aroma of the cinnamon candle she'd lit that morning still lingering, when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. It was a Washington, D.C. area code, not one she recognized, and her first instinct was to ignore it. Scams were rampant, and she had little patience for them after a long day of reconciling accounts. But the phone persisted, buzzing again, then a third time, with an insistent, almost demanding rhythm that cut through the office quiet. A knot of unease began to tighten in her stomach. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the green answer icon, a strange premonition fluttering in her chest. For 8 years there had been nothing but silence from the military, from anyone really, concerning Kyle. The initial flurry of investigations, the perfunctory phone calls, had all faded into a deafening quiet. Why now? With a trembling breath she answered, her voice a little more breathless than she intended. A crisp, formal voice on the other end introduced himself as Lieutenant David Diaz, an investigator with the Army's Criminal Investigation Division. The title alone sent a jolt of alarm through her. She'd never heard of him, never dealt with the CID directly before. Her heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He spoke of recent developments, a new lead connected to her brother's case, and the need for her presence at Camp Lejeune. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken implications, shattering the fragile peace she had so painstakingly built around herself. A flicker of hope, dangerous and almost unbearable, ignited within her, intertwined with a chilling dread. After 8 years of quiet resignation, the past, it seemed, was not content to remain buried. The drive to Camp Lejeune was a pilgrimage through Maggie's fractured memories. The highway, once a blur of anticipation on visits to Kyle, now stretched before her like a long, winding scar across the North Carolina landscape. Each mile marker ticked by, a silent countdown to a confrontation with a past she desperately tried to outrun. She remembered the excited chatter in the car, the cheap coffee they'd buy at roadside diners, and Kyle's infectious grin as he'd greet them, a newly minted Marine full of boundless energy and an unwavering sense of purpose. He had been so proud, so full of life, so certain of his path. Now those vibrant images were superimposed with the stark reality of his absence, a constant ache in her chest. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, as the familiar sign for Camp Lejeune loomed into view. The sprawling base, a miniature city dedicated to military precision, felt colder, more imposing than she remembered. The guard at the gate, young and stoic, checked her ID with an almost detached efficiency, his eyes skimming over her face as if searching for something beyond the mundane. He waved her through, and the sheer scale of the base began to reveal itself. Rows of identical barracks, training grounds stretching into the distance, and the distant rhythmic thud of artillery practice, a grim reminder of the base's true purpose. The air, thick with the scent of pine and something metallic, carried a tangible weight of history and unspoken stories. She followed Lieutenant Diaz's precise directions, her mind a whirlwind of anxiety and a fragile, almost fearful hope. The buildings grew older, more weathered, as she ventured deeper into the less trafficked areas of the base. Rust-streaked corrugated metal, faded paint, and overgrown weeds spoke of neglect, a stark contrast to the manicured lawns and bustling activity of the main thoroughfares. Finally, she pulled up to a cluster of dilapidated structures, their windows boarded up, their roofs sagging under the weight of years. This was it. The old storage hangars. A single unmarked CID vehicle was parked near the entrance, and Lieutenant Diaz, a man of average height with a receding hairline and an air of quiet weariness, stood beside it, his gaze fixed on the ground. He looked tired, his face etched with lines that spoke of too many late nights and too many unsolved cases. He didn't offer a smile, only a curt nod as she approached, his silence amplifying the gravity of the moment. Maggie's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the backdrop of the desolate surroundings. The sun, now low in the sky, cast long, eerie shadows across the decaying structures, making them appear even more foreboding. A shiver, unrelated to the crisp autumn air, ran down her spine. The air here felt different, heavy with a palpable sense of abandonment, and something else, something she couldn't quite name, but that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. She knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone that she was standing on the precipice of a revelation that would forever alter her understanding of Kyle's disappearance. Lieutenant Diaz's gaze, though weary, held a steely glint as he gestured towards the main hangar. They found it inside, behind one of the old storage bays, he explained, his voice low, almost a murmur against the vast emptiness of the structure. The hangar itself was cavernous, its interior a dusty twilight, broken only by narrow shafts of light, piercing through gaps in the metal siding. The air was thick, with the acrid scent of old dust, decaying wood, and something metallic, almost industrial, that snagged at Maggie's throat. Rusting shelves, long emptied of their contents, lined the perimeter like skeletal remains, and discarded pallets lay scattered across the concrete floor, testament to years of disuse. It was the kind of place where forgotten things went to crumble, where time seemed to slow down and decay became the dominant force. Diaz led her deeper into the structure, their footsteps echoing hollowly in the vast space. The light grew dimmer, and Maggie felt a prickle of unease crawl up her spine. They approached a section where a jagged, uneven hole had been cut into a seemingly solid metal wall, revealing a dark recess behind it. The edges of the cut gleamed ominously, a stark contrast to the grimy surfaces around them. This was where the demolition crew had made their horrifying discovery. A single powerful work light illuminated the opening, casting long, distorted shadows that danced around them like silent observers. Inside the cramped, dusty space, carefully protected by a clear plastic sheet, sat a rectangular metal container remarkably well preserved. It was a military-grade ammunition box, the kind designed to withstand extreme conditions, and its sturdy, no-nonsense construction offered a chilling paradox to the vulnerability of its contents. Diaz knelt, carefully peeling back the plastic to reveal what lay within. Maggie's breath hitched in her throat. There, nestled amongst layers of ancient, decaying packing material, were Kyle's belongings. First, a laptop, its once sleek casing now dented and scratched, a thin film of grime covering its surface. It looked old, a relic from a different era, and a wave of nausea washed over Maggie as she recognized the distinctive stickers Kyle had plastered on its lid. A grinning skull, the emblem of his favorite band, a faded university decal. But it was the other items that truly seized her attention. Beside the laptop lay a thick, leather-bound journal, its pages slightly swollen from years of confinement, its corners dog-eared and worn. It was unmistakably Kyle's, the one he had carried everywhere, filling it with his sprawling handwriting. And then the most unsettling discovery: several small, empty prescription bottles. Their labels faded but still legible, indicating powerful opioid painkillers. Kyle had never mentioned pain, never hinted at any medical issues beyond the minor aches and sprains common to military training. A cold dread began to spread through Maggie's veins. Diaz's voice was low, almost somber. The construction crew found this behind a false wall, tucked away, almost like someone wanted it to be hidden. He paused, his eyes meeting hers, a flicker of something akin to sympathy in their depths. We've run initial checks. The laptop is severely damaged, but our forensics team believes they might be able to extract some data. The journal obviously is intact. As for the prescription bottles, we're investigating. No record of Kyle ever being prescribed these through official channels. Maggie felt a tremor run through her. This wasn't just a new lead, it was a seismic shift. This wasn't a case of desertion. This was something far darker, far more sinister. The careful, almost meticulous way the items had been hidden, the presence of the painkillers, the sheer secrecy of it all. It screamed of a truth that had been suppressed, a story that had been buried. The vast, empty hangar seemed to close in around her, the air suddenly heavy with the unspoken questions that hung between them. What secrets had Kyle been keeping, and why had they been discovered only now, 8 long, agonizing years later? The official narrative of his disappearance, once frustratingly simple, had just shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces, leaving only a chilling unknown in its wake. The silence in the cavernous hangar pressed in on Maggie, broken only by the hum of the work light and the distant, almost imperceptible sounds of the base outside. She stood motionless, her gaze fixed on the contents of the metal box, each item a silent scream from a past she had tried to bury. The damaged laptop, the journal, the empty pill bottles. They weren't just objects. They were fragments of a life, fragments of Kyle, demanding to be pieced together. A cold, hard certainty began to solidify in her mind. Kyle had not deserted. This meticulous concealment spoke of desperation, of a secret so profound it had to be buried. Lieutenant Diaz, observing her quiet absorption, cleared his throat. "We've notified the higher-ups," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "The official stance has, of course, been desertion for 8 years. This changes things. We're reopening the case officially." His words, while professional, lacked any real reassurance. Maggie sensed a tension in him, a weariness that went beyond just long hours. It was the weariness of someone who had seen too much, or perhaps too little, of the truth. "No record of these prescriptions?" Maggie finally managed to ask, her voice hoarse. She pointed at the empty bottles, their plastic surfaces dulled with age. He never took anything like this. He was always so healthy, so vibrant. The memory of Kyle, muscular and athletic, pushing himself to the limits, made the idea of him needing such powerful painkillers almost impossible to reconcile. Diaz shook his head slowly. Not through any official military channels. No record of him being diagnosed with anything that would warrant them either. He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. Which raises a lot of questions. Was he getting them from an unofficial source? Was he in pain? And if so, from what? And why would he hide it? The questions hung in the dusty air, each one a fresh puncture wound in Maggie's heart. Had her brother been suffering in silence? Had he been in pain that no one knew about, not even his family? The thought was a chilling one, painting a picture of a private agony that went against everything she knew about his open, jovial nature. It felt like a betrayal, not by Kyle, but by the circumstances that had forced him to endure such a burden alone. "And the laptop, the journal?" Maggie pressed, her voice gaining a new edge of determination. "What do you expect to find there? What could possibly be so important that he would hide it like this?" She looked at the false wall, the crude, deliberate way it had been constructed. This wasn't a casual hiding place, it was a desperate measure. Diaz exhaled slowly, a soft hiss of air. "The laptop is our biggest unknown. If we can recover data, it could be anything. Communications, personal files, anything that might shed light on his last days here. The journal, well, a personal account. It could provide context, insight into his state of mind, his activities, who he was interacting with." His words were logical, clinical, but Maggie felt a profound sense of foreboding. The idea of reading Kyle's last thoughts, his private struggles, was both compelling and terrifying. As the late afternoon light faded, casting long, distorted shadows across the desolate hangar, Maggie felt an unsettling certainty solidify within her. This was not a simple case of a young Marine who simply walked away. The hidden cache, the powerful painkillers, the very secrecy of it all pointed to something far more complex, far more sinister. Kyle had not vanished. He had been made to vanish. The truth, she instinctively knew, was lurking in the shadows, waiting to be dragged into the harsh light. And she, his unwavering sister, was now inextricably bound to the task of unearthing it, no matter how dark or painful it proved to be. The case of Kyle O'Connor, closed for 8 long years, had just been ripped wide open, and Maggie found herself standing at the very precipice of a terrifying and urgent new reality. Back in the hushed solitude of her small living room, the quiet hum of her refrigerator, a stark contrast to the echoing vastness of the hangar, Maggie carefully laid out the recovered items on her coffee table. The laptop, its screen a dark, lifeless mirror, seemed to mock her with its silence. But it was the journal, its leather cover, worn smooth with age and handling, that called to her with an almost magnetic pull. Its very existence felt like a voice from the grave, a chance to finally hear Kyle again. She turned the journal over in her hands, the familiar weight a tangible link to her brother. The first few pages were filled with what looked like normal, if sporadic, entries, mundane observations about base life, gripes about drill sergeants, excited notes about upcoming leave. But soon the handwriting began to change, becoming more rushed, more fragmented, and then the strange symbols appeared, interspersing the words, breaking up sentences, making whole paragraphs inscrutable. It was a code, she realized with a jolt, a private language they had concocted as children, a secret alphabet they used to pass notes in class, to plan elaborate backyard adventures, to confess their deepest fears and wildest dreams. A bitter taste filled her mouth. The fact that Kyle had resorted to their childhood code meant he was hiding something truly significant, something he dared not write plainly. With a determination that bordered on desperation, Maggie retrieved an old, dog-eared notebook from a dusty box in her closet, a relic from their youth filled with their intricate code keys and shared childhood fantasies. She began to work slowly, painstakingly. matching the symbols to the letters, her brow furrowed in concentration. The process was agonizingly slow, each deciphered word a small victory, each incomprehensible passage a frustrating setback. The evening stretched into night, the single lamp casting a pool of warm light around her, pushing back the encroaching darkness outside. As she delved deeper into the journal, the entries became increasingly disturbing. Kyle wrote of a persistent, debilitating pain, a savage fire in his leg that never truly subsided. He described it as a constant companion, an insidious enemy that gnawed at his resolve, making even simple tasks excruciating. He also wrote of the military doctors dismissing his complaints, attributing his pain to malingering or the general rigors of training, refusing to prescribe him anything beyond over-the-counter remedies. The entries spoke of a growing sense of isolation, of being disbelieved and left to suffer alone. He hinted at clandestine visits to off-base clinics, desperate attempts to find relief which explained the presence of the prescription bottles. A cold dread seeped into Maggie's bones. Kyle had been suffering profoundly and silently, while she had been living her ordinary life, oblivious. But then the journal took an even more alarming turn. Amidst the chronicles of his pain, cryptic references to the captain's game and the late-night deliveries began to appear. Kyle wrote of strange movements of equipment after hours, of hushed conversations and veiled threats overheard in the barracks. He was seeing things, he believed, things that weren't supposed to be seen. His entries grew more paranoid, more urgent, filled with a nascent suspicion that something illicit was happening on the base, something high-ranking officers were involved in. He mentioned a particular officer, a Captain Ben Carter, whose name popped up repeatedly in connection to these games. Kyle's words were laced with a growing sense of danger, a feeling that he was treading on ground far more treacherous than any training exercise. Maggie's hands trembled as she read, the weight of his secret, now her secret, pressing down on her. The more she deciphered, the clearer it became. Kyle's disappearance was not a desertion, nor was it merely a consequence of his hidden pain. It was something far more sinister, a direct result of the dangerous truths he was beginning to uncover. The journal was not just a record, it was a desperate plea, a breadcrumb trail left by a brother fearing for his life. And Maggie, now armed with these first terrifying insights, knew her journey had only just begun. The small, cluttered office of Arthur Art Jenkins smelled of stale coffee, old electronics, and an underlying faint aroma of ozone. Art, a man whose glasses perpetually slipped down his nose and whose perpetually stained T-shirt was a testament to his dedication to the digital realm, peered at the damaged laptop with the intensity of a surgeon. Maggie watched him, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. This laptop was more than just a piece of technology. It was a potential key, a digital ghost that might finally speak the truth. "It's rough," Art mumbled, more to himself than to Maggie, as he carefully connected a series of cables and probes to the battered machine. "Looks like it took a pretty good hit, and then sat in a humid environment for a while. Corrosion's a nightmare." Maggie's heart sank with each word. The chances of recovering anything seemed to dwindle with every pessimistic assessment. But Art was known for his tenacity, a digital archaeologist who thrived on seemingly impossible recoveries. Hours bled into a long, agonizing day. Maggie paced Art's tiny waiting area, the silence punctuated only by the whirring of cooling fans and the occasional frustrated grunt from the inner sanctum. She tried to read a magazine, but the words blurred, her mind constantly drifting back to Kyle, to the pain he'd endured, the secrets he'd kept. She imagined him, alone in that hidden space, hunched over this very laptop, desperate to record what he knew, to leave a trail. Finally, just as the last rays of sunlight began to stretch thin across the horizon, Art emerged a triumphant, albeit weary grin on his face. His glasses were even further down his nose, and his hair was more disheveled than usual, but his eyes gleamed with success. "Got something," he announced, his voice raspy. "Not everything, mind you, but enough." Looks like he had a hidden partition, encrypted. Smart kid. Maggie rushed forward, her hands clasped tightly. "What is it?" Art led her back into his cluttered workspace, a digital sanctuary filled with monitors and blinking lights. On one screen, a series of folders and files previously invisible were now displayed. "Looks like mostly medical records at first," Art explained, scrolling through the files. Detailed reports, X-rays, MRI scans, all from off-base clinics. He was getting treatment for a serious knee injury, something far beyond a sprain. Looks like a torn meniscus and some ligament damage, really severe. Maggie stared at the images on the screen, a fresh wave of grief washing over her. The clear clinical images of her brother's injured knee were a stark testament to the pain he had hidden. It was worse than she could have imagined, explaining the need for the powerful painkillers mentioned in his journal. He hadn't been imagining it. He had been truly, severely injured, and the military had, for some reason, chosen to ignore or downplay it. But then Art clicked on another folder, and Maggie's breath caught in her throat. This folder was labeled with another of their childhood code words, Whispers. Inside were a series of video files, raw, shaky, clearly recorded on a small, discreet device. "These are interesting," Art said, his voice tinged with a new note of caution. "Looks like he was recording things, covertly." Maggie's eyes were glued to the screen as the first video played. It was grainy, dark, filmed from a low angle, as if from a pocket or backpack. The images flickered, the dim interior of a military warehouse, crates being moved in the dead of night, hushed figures interacting, shadowy exchanges, no clear faces, no distinct conversations. But the context was undeniable. This wasn't standard military procedure. This was clandestine. And then a figure, partially obscured but recognizable by his build and a distinctive gait, appeared on screen. It was Captain Ben Carter, the officer Kyle had mentioned in his journal. A cold shiver ran down Maggie's spine, dispelling any lingering doubt. Kyle had been right. He hadn't just been suffering from a physical injury, he had stumbled upon something far more dangerous, something that ultimately led to his disappearance. The pieces of the puzzle, once scattered and seemingly unrelated, were beginning to fall into place, forming a picture of deception, corruption, and a terrifying truth that was only just beginning to emerge from the digital darkness. The glowing screen in Art's office became a window into Kyle's secret life, each video file a fragment of a desperate hidden investigation. Maggie spent hours there, her initial shock slowly giving way to a cold, burning resolve. Art, sensing the gravity of the situation, offered his expertise freely, working tirelessly to enhance the grainy footage, isolate voices, and trace connections. The videos, recorded with a remarkable, almost reckless courage, revealed a pattern. Most of them were shot late at night, in the hushed, deserted corners of the base, the back alleys of supply depots, the dimly lit interiors of rarely used warehouses, the remote stretches of fence line where shadows stretched long and deep. Kyle, it became clear, had been meticulously documenting what he saw. The dates stamped on the files spanned weeks, then months, painting a chilling timeline of his growing suspicions. He hadn't been looking for trouble. The journal had made that clear. His primary concern was his debilitating knee pain and the military's dismissive attitude towards it. But as he sought out quiet, secluded spots for his clandestine pain management, the very places he'd found to administer his illicit medication away from prying eyes, he started to notice irregularities. Strange, unmarked vans arriving after midnight, figures in non-regulation attire meeting with uniformed officers, the subtle but unmistakable clatter of heavy equipment being moved in and out of the warehouses. The footage, though often obscured by darkness or distance, captured fragments of conversations, whispers that spoke of shipments, quotas, and off-book sales. Maggie, her ear pressed close to the laptop speakers, strained to decipher the muffled words. The language was coded, full of slang and oblique references, but the intent was horrifyingly clear. This was an organized operation, a black market ring operating right under the military's nose. And always in the periphery or directly in focus was Captain Ben Carter. Kyle's camera, small and easily concealed, seemed almost drawn to him. Carter, a man Maggie vaguely remembered from Kyle's boot camp graduation as charismatic and outwardly respectable, appeared in multiple videos, often directing the shadowy figures, his silhouette a commanding presence against the dim backdrop. In one particularly chilling clip taken from a considerable distance but amplified by art, Carter's voice was distinctly audible, a low, menacing tone. "Anyone sniffing around, anyone asks questions, they get dealt with. Understood?" The words, delivered with a chilling calm, sent a fresh wave of ice through Maggie. This wasn't just petty theft. This was a well-oiled machine protected by threats and intimidation. Maggie's mind raced, connecting the dots. Kyle's increasing paranoia, detailed in his journal, suddenly made horrifying sense. He hadn't been delusional. He had been witnessing a crime, a large-scale embezzlement of military resources, and he had been doing it while battling a debilitating injury and facing constant pain. The stress, the fear, the isolation, it was a suffocating combination. She found herself replaying fragments of the videos, scrutinizing Carter's face, his gestures. He was not just a participant, he was a leader, the orchestrator. The implications were staggering. If Captain Carter was involved, who else was? How high did this conspiracy go, and what exactly had Kyle done to draw their attention? He hadn't just been a witness. He had clearly become a threat. The realization was like a punch to the gut. Her brother, a good man, a principled Marine, had stumbled into a hornet's nest of corruption, and it had cost him everything. The quiet certainty of his desertion had shattered, replaced by the terrifying, irrefutable truth that Kyle O'Connor had been silenced, not by choice, but by force, and now the same insidious network that had taken him might very well be watching her. The chilling reality of Captain Ben Carter's involvement, confirmed by Kyle's covert video footage, settled over Maggie like a shroud. The man who had once embodied the strict discipline and unwavering professionalism of the Marines now loomed as a dark figure in her brother's final days. He was not just a name in a journal, he was a tangible threat, a key piece in the horrifying puzzle of Kyle's disappearance. Maggie spent the next few days in a relentless cycle of reviewing the evidence. She reread Kyle's journal entries, now illuminated by the visual proof. His growing fear, his suspicion that the captain was watching him, that his every move was being scrutinized. It wasn't paranoia. It was an accurate assessment of a desperate situation, the entries describing his attempts to gather more concrete evidence, to identify the full scope of the black market operation, painted a picture of a young man trapped between his integrity and an escalating danger. He wrote of feeling alone, of not knowing who to trust within the military hierarchy, a sentiment that resonated deeply with Maggie. The video files became her constant companions. She watched them on a loop, zooming in on faces, scrutinizing backgrounds, searching for any detail she might have missed. Art, still engrossed in the technical aspects, managed to clean up some of the audio, revealing fragments of conversations that further incriminated Carter and his associates. They spoke of routes for illicit goods, of payoffs and hidden accounts, of avoiding unwanted attention. The casual ruthlessness in their voices sent shivers down Maggie's spine. This was not a one-time transgression. It was a sophisticated, well-established criminal enterprise flourishing within the very institution designed to uphold national security. One evening, as she sat in Art's office, the late hour casting long shadows across the monitors, a detail in one of the most recent videos caught her eye. It was a fleeting shot, a quick pan of Kyle's hidden camera, but for a split second a face appeared clearly. It wasn't Carter, it was a younger Marine, someone Maggie didn't recognize, standing in the background, observing the illicit exchange with a subtle, almost imperceptible flicker of unease in his eyes. He wasn't participating, he was merely present, a silent witness. The face haunted her. Could he have seen what Kyle saw? Could he have known something? Maggie meticulously pulled up a database of Marines stationed at Camp Lejeune during Kyle's time there, cross-referencing it with the dates of the video. It was a laborious process, but her determination was unwavering. Finally, after hours of searching, she found a match. Private First Class Daniel "Danny" Miller. His records indicated he had been transferred to a different base shortly after Kyle's disappearance, a move that seemed almost too convenient. A new avenue of investigation opened before her, simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. If Danny Miller was still alive, he might hold another piece of the puzzle. But reaching out to him also carried immense risk. If he had been involved, even peripherally, or if he knew about the operation, contacting him could alert Carter's network. Maggie felt a cold dread creep into her bones. Kyle had died because he uncovered the truth. Was she now putting herself in the same perilous position? The air in the room grew heavy with unspoken danger, a tangible presence that made her heart pound. She was no longer just an aggrieved sister seeking answers. She was actively stepping into the dangerous world that had swallowed her brother whole. The closer she got to the truth, the more she felt the chilling breath of the same dark forces that had silenced Kyle. The name Daniel Miller buzzed in Maggie's mind like an angry hornet, a potential key to unlocking the dark secrets that had consumed her brother. But with that name came a chilling realization. She was no longer just an observer. She was now actively digging, unearthing truths that powerful and dangerous people had gone to great lengths to bury. The stakes had been raised, and the comfortable distance of simply grieving a lost brother had vanished. She was now in the game, whether she liked it or not. The first subtle signs of this new reality began to appear almost immediately after her discovery of Miller's identity. She started noticing small things, barely perceptible at first, that prickled at her subconscious. The same dark sedan parked a few blocks from her house, day after day, its tinted windows offering no glimpse of its occupant. A sudden, inexplicable surge of static on her phone line during a call with Art. The unsettling feeling of being watched, a prickling sensation on the back of her neck that she couldn't shake, even in the safety of her own home. One Tuesday evening, after a particularly grueling day at the accounting firm, Maggie returned to find her front door slightly ajar, not wide open, but just enough to signal that it hadn't been properly latched. Her heart leaped into her throat. She lived alone, always meticulous about locking up. A cold dread seeped into her bones. She slowly pushed the door open, her hand instinctively reaching for the heavy iron poker by the fireplace. The house was silent, too silent. Nothing appeared to be missing, no drawers rifled through, no obvious signs of forced entry. But the air felt disturbed, as if an unseen presence had passed through, leaving behind a residue of violation. Someone had been there. They hadn't stolen anything. They had been looking for something. Or perhaps they had simply been sending a message. The incident solidified her fear. These weren't random occurrences. This was a deliberate escalation, a direct response to her relentless pursuit of the truth. Captain Carter's anyone sniffing around threat from Kyle's video played in her mind, a chilling prophecy now coming to pass. She thought of Kyle, alone and in pain, battling these same unseen forces. The thought ignited a fierce protective fire within her, eclipsing her fear. She would not back down. The following day, as Maggie left Art's office after another session of scrutinizing video footage, she noticed a black SUV tailing her from a discreet distance. Her stomach churned. This was no longer a vague suspicion. It was an undeniable reality. They knew she was digging, and they were making their presence known. The sense of isolation grew, a cold grip around her heart. She couldn't go to the local police. This was a military matter, deeply entrenched within a system that had initially dismissed Kyle's disappearance. Lieutenant Diaz was her only real ally, but even he felt distant, a figure within the very system she was beginning to distrust. That night, lying in bed, sleep eluding her, Maggie felt the weight of Kyle's legacy pressed down on her. He had died fighting for what was right, trying to expose corruption. Now, she was carrying that torch, and the heat of it was becoming unbearable. The subtle threats, the unsettling surveillance, the chilling realization that she was walking directly into the path of those who had silenced her brother. It all coalesced into a terrifying understanding. She was no longer just a sister seeking answers. She was now a direct threat to a powerful, ruthless network, and they were making it clear they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The game had shifted, and Maggie found herself caught in a dangerous current, being pulled deeper into a perilous tide of deceit and retribution. The only way out, she knew, was to reach the very source of the darkness, to expose the truth, no matter the personal cost. The creeping dread that had shadowed Maggie for days now sharpened into a cold, determined resolve. The veiled threats, the ominous surveillance, they were no longer simply unsettling. They were a clear declaration of war. They knew she was close, and they would stop at nothing. But Maggie, hardened by 8 years of unanswered questions and fueled by the raw injustice done to her brother, would not yield. She would use their own tactics against them. Her plan began to solidify, meticulously crafted over sleepless nights, each detail weighed and reweighed. The key, she realized, lay in Kyle's recovered evidence and the very place where it had been found, the old abandoned hangar. It was their common ground, the scene of both Kyle's final desperate act and her own terrifying discovery. It was where the trap would be laid. She reached out to Lieutenant Diaz, carefully omitting the more volatile details of her personal surveillance. Instead, she focused on the new evidence from Kyle's laptop and journal, emphasizing the irrefutable proof of Captain Carter's involvement and the black market operation. Diaz listened intently, his face grave, the weariness in his eyes deepening as the enormity of the corruption became apparent. He confirmed that Captain Carter was currently stationed at a training facility hundreds of miles away, making a direct, immediate arrest difficult without irrefutable proof that would stand up in a military court. They needed to force his hand to draw him out. Maggie proposed her audacious plan. They would leak information carefully, subtly, that a more complete set of Kyle's lost evidence, something so damning it would expose the entire operation, was still hidden, and that she was about to turn it over to a higher authority. The lost evidence, of course, was a fabrication, a phantom bait designed to lure the perpetrators into the open. The real evidence was already secure, duplicated, and shared with Diaz. The bait would be dangled through carefully chosen channels, whispered rumors in the right places, hints dropped to peripheral contacts who might inadvertently or purposefully carry the message back to Carter's network. The goal was to create a sense of urgency, of impending exposure, forcing Carter to return to Camp Lejeune to either retrieve the supposed missing evidence or silence Maggie. They would choose a time and place for the supposed handover that would be both isolated and familiar to the perpetrators, the abandoned hangar. It was a place heavy with the echoes of betrayal and secrecy, a fitting stage for the final confrontation. Diaz, though initially hesitant about the inherent risks to Maggie, recognized the necessity of the tactic. Direct confrontation was their best chance to catch Carter and his associates red-handed, to expose the true extent of their criminal enterprise and secure their arrest. He would arrange for a small, trusted team of CID agents to be hidden, ready to move in once the trap was sprung. Maggie spent the following days in a heightened state of alert, every shadow a potential threat, every unfamiliar car a harbinger of danger. She knew she was placing herself in immense peril, but the image of Kyle suffering and silenced burned within her, a constant reminder of why she had to see this through. The plan was audacious, dangerous, and fraught with uncertainty. But for the first time in 8 long years, Maggie felt a glimmer of power, a sense that she was finally fighting back, not just for Kyle's memory, but for justice itself. The final act was drawing near, and the desolate, dust-filled hangar waited, a silent, grim monument to the truths it was about to reveal. The air in the abandoned hangar was thick with the scent of dust and anticipation. A heavy cloak draped over the decaying structure. Maggie, her heart a drum against her ribs, stood near the gaping hole in the false wall where Kyle's hidden cache had been found. Lieutenant Diaz and his small hand-picked team of CID agents were invisible, melted into the shadows of the surrounding derelict buildings, their presence a silent, reassuring weight. Maggie felt a strange mix of terror and exhilarating clarity. This was it. The culmination of 8 years of agonizing uncertainty, of whispered doubts and desperate hopes. The plan was simple, yet fraught with peril. Maggie, as the perceived holder of the missing damning evidence, was the bait. She carried a carefully prepared, innocuous envelope designed to look weighty and official, containing only blank paper. The real evidence, the journal, the recovered laptop data, the enhanced videos, was safely in Diaz's possession, duplicated and secured. The rumor they had planted, a desperate whisper of a final irrefutable set of documents Kyle had allegedly hidden, was meant to draw Captain Carter out, to force him to act. The first vehicle that approached was an unmarked black SUV, its engine a low rumble that cut through the evening quiet. It pulled up to the hangar entrance, its headlights cutting harsh beams through the dust-filled air. 2 figures emerged, their faces obscured by the dim light and the distance, but their posture was unmistakable. Then, a second vehicle, a dark pickup truck, pulled up behind it, and more figures emerged, moving with a practiced, almost military precision. Finally, the man Maggie had only seen in grainy videos stepped out of the SUV, his silhouette unmistakable. Captain Ben Carter. He was even more imposing in person than in the footage, his presence radiating an aura of coiled tension. He wasn't in uniform, but in dark civilian clothes, a detail that screamed of clandestine intent. Behind him, Maggie recognized the face of Private First Class Daniel Miller from Kyle's video, looking gaunt and uneasy, almost unwillingly caught in Carter's shadow. The sight of Miller confirmed her suspicions about his coerced involvement, adding a new layer of tragedy to the unfolding drama. Carter approached the hangar entrance slowly, his eyes scanning the cavernous interior, his senses alert. He moved with a predator's caution, his gaze piercing the gloom. Maggie remained perfectly still, her face carefully neutral, her hands clasped in front of her. The tension was a palpable force, thick and suffocating. "Ms. O'Connor?" Carter's voice cut through the silence, surprisingly calm, almost amiable, but with an underlying edge of steel. "A pleasure to finally meet you. I hear you've been looking for some answers." There was no hint of guilt or fear in his tone, only a chilling confidence. Maggie met his gaze, her voice steady despite the frantic pounding in her chest. "I have, and I believe you have them." She held up the envelope, a silent challenge. "My brother left something for me, something you clearly want very badly." Carter's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dark crossing his face. "Let's not play games, Ms. O'Connor. You know what we're here for. Where is it?" His voice dropped, losing its veneer of politeness, becoming a low growl. "And who else have you told?" As he took a step forward, his men fanning out behind him, a prearranged signal flashed from Maggie's hidden pocket. The moment the light appeared, the cavernous hangar erupted. Lieutenant Diaz and his team, emerging from their concealed positions, moved with lightning speed, their shouts echoing through the space. "CID! Hands up! You're under arrest!" Chaos erupted. Carter's men, caught off guard, reacted with a mixture of confusion and desperate aggression. A brief, violent struggle ensued, punctuated by shouts, the thud of bodies, and the sharp metallic click of handcuffs. Carter himself, displaying a surprising agility, made a desperate dash towards a side exit, but Diaz, anticipating his move, intercepted him. The 2 men grappled, a silent, brutal dance of force and determination. In the midst of the chaos, Maggie saw Daniel Miller, his face a mask of terror, hesitate for a moment, then simply drop to his knees, his hands raised in surrender. His silence, his broken demeanor, spoke volumes. He was a pawn, caught in a web he couldn't escape. The confrontation, though brief, was intense, a raw eruption of the hidden malevolence that had festered on the base for years. As Captain Ben Carter was finally subdued and dragged away, his face contorted in a mask of rage and defeat, Maggie felt a strange mix of exhaustion and vindication. The truth, ugly and painful, was finally out. But the lingering question remained. What had truly happened to Kyle, and where was he now? The fight was far from over. The harsh glare of the interrogation room lights illuminated the grim reality of Captain Ben Carter's downfall. Gone was the calm, confident demeanor he had displayed in the hangar. Now his face was a mask of simmering rage and a desperate, rapidly fading arrogance. Lieutenant Diaz, with Maggie observing from behind a one-way mirror, methodically laid out the evidence. Kyle's journal, his chilling video recordings, the recovered laptop data, the testimony of Private First Class Daniel Miller, who, shattered and relieved, had finally broken and corroborated Kyle's findings. The weight of the accumulated truth was undeniable. Carter, cornered and exposed, finally began to crack. His confession, initially delivered with defiant sneers, slowly crumbled into a bitter torrent of self-preservation. He admitted to orchestrating the black market operation, selling surplus military equipment for personal gain. The details were sordid, a network of complicit officers and contractors, each playing a part in siphoning off resources meant for the servicemen. The part that truly gripped Maggie, the part that had haunted her for 8 years, was the truth about Kyle. Carter confessed that Kyle, astute and principled, had stumbled upon the operation due to his frequent, clandestine visits to the disused parts of the base to manage his hidden pain. He hadn't actively sought to expose them at first, merely observed. But as he gathered more evidence, his conscience had driven him to act. He had started to discreetly contact military intelligence, trying to find a trusted avenue to report what he knew without endangering himself. Carter, fearing exposure, had ordered him to be neutralized. The word neutralized hung in the air like a poisonous gas. Carter's voice grew colder, devoid of remorse, as he described how Kyle had been ambushed during one of his late-night filming excursions. He had been taken, not killed outright, but held captive in one of the very disused underground bunkers on the base, a place known only to a few, a relic from the Cold War that had been long forgotten and perfectly suited for clandestine operations. The plan was to hold him indefinitely, to break him, to force him into silence or complicity, then quietly dispose of him after the desertion story had taken root. But Kyle, even weakened by his injury and captivity, had fought back. He had resisted, refused to break, clinging to the slim hope of escape and exposure. Carter's confession ended abruptly, leaving Maggie with a horrific, incomplete picture. He didn't know what ultimately happened to Kyle. He claimed his subordinates were responsible for managing Kyle after his capture, implying he was merely a cog in a larger, more ruthless machine. The final fate of her brother remained shrouded in a chilling uncertainty. Was he still alive, languishing in some hidden cell? Or had he met a more permanent, silent end? The answer, though tantalizingly close, remained just out of reach, a cruel twist in their long search. News of Captain Carter's arrest and the unfolding scandal sent shockwaves through the military community. A full-scale investigation was launched, promising to unearth every layer of the corruption he had masterminded. Public outrage swelled, demanding accountability from an institution built on trust and honor. For Maggie, the legal proceedings would be a long and painful road, filled with testimonies and uncomfortable truths. But the biggest revelation, the one that truly mattered, was the complete exoneration of Kyle. His name, tarnished by years of official neglect, was finally cleared. He was no longer a deserter. He was a hero, a whistleblower who had paid the ultimate price for his integrity. The official apology from the Marine Corps, though years late, was a hollow comfort. It could not bring Kyle back, nor could it erase the years of torment her family had endured. But it was a start, a small acknowledgment of the profound injustice that had been done. The consequences for Carter and his network would be severe, but for Maggie, the most profound consequence was the shattering of the last shred of hope that Kyle might still be alive. The bitter truth of his prolonged suffering and likely demise hung heavy in the air, a devastating silence where she had once dared to dream of reunion. Yet amidst the crushing grief, A fierce pride surged within her. Kyle had stood his ground, even against overwhelming odds, proving himself to be the honorable Marine she always knew him to be. His sacrifice would not be in vain. The aftermath of Captain Carter's arrest, while bringing a measure of grim satisfaction, still left a vast, aching void in Maggie's heart. The truth was out. Kyle's name was cleared, but his ultimate fate remained agonizingly unknown. The relentless search for answers had taken its toll, leaving her emotionally drained and physically exhausted. The news of the scandal dominated national headlines, igniting a fervent public debate about military accountability and transparency. Congress launched a full-scale inquiry, promising to expose every layer of corruption and hold those responsible to account. For Maggie, the legal proceedings would be a long, arduous journey filled with grim details and painful memories. But the battle was far from over. In the weeks that followed, Maggie found herself caught in a whirlwind of interviews with military investigators, reporters, and legal teams. She recounted Kyle's story, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands, her eyes fixed on the memory of his unwavering integrity. She spoke of his hidden pain, his desperate attempts to seek help, and his accidental discovery of Carter's illicit operation. She ensured that the narrative of Kyle, the deserter, was irrevocably shattered, replaced by the truth of Kyle, the hero. The official apology from the Marine Corps, delivered by a high-ranking general with a somber face, was a televised event. It was a formal acknowledgement of their failure, a solemn promise to reform, to ensure no other family endured such prolonged suffering. Maggie received it with a quiet dignity, knowing that no apology, however sincere, could ever bring Kyle back. It was a hollow comfort, a belated validation that only underscored the immense cost of their negligence. The military, under intense public pressure, launched a comprehensive search operation on Camp Lejeune, particularly in the disused areas Carter had mentioned. Days turned into weeks, hope flickering and dying with each passing day. Maggie waited, her heart a fragile thing, refusing to fully acknowledge the inevitable, even as her mind began to accept it. Finally, after an agonizing month, the news came. In one of the forgotten underground bunkers, a grim discovery was made. The remains, positively identified through dental records and DNA, were Kyle's. He had not survived his captivity. The finality of it was a crushing blow, yet it also brought a strange, agonizing peace. The lingering question, the torturous uncertainty, had finally been answered. Kyle was gone, but he was no longer lost. The funeral was a quiet affair, attended by family, a few of Kyle's former comrades, and Lieutenant Diaz, who stood silently, a picture of solemn respect. Kyle was buried with full military honors, his coffin draped with the American flag, a stark contrast to the dishonorable label he had carried for so long. As the bugle played taps, its mournful notes echoing across the cemetery, Maggie felt a deep, profound grief, but also a fierce pride. Her brother had died a hero, bravely upholding the very principles he swore to protect. In the months that followed, Maggie slowly began to piece her life back together, forever changed by the crucible of her experience. The pain of loss remained, a dull throb that would never truly fade, but it was now interwoven with a powerful purpose. She became a vocal advocate for military reform, working with veteran organizations and legal groups to push for greater transparency, better support for service members struggling with injuries, and harsher penalties for corruption within the ranks. She established the Kyle O'Connor Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to supporting whistleblowers within the military and providing resources for families of missing service members. Her advocacy became a new calling, a way to honor Kyle's sacrifice and ensure that his story served as a warning, a catalyst for change. The darkness of her past, the profound injustice, had been transformed into a beacon of hope for others. Maggie often found herself looking at an old photograph of Kyle, his boyish grin radiating pure joy. He was gone, but his spirit, his unwavering commitment to truth and honor, lived on through her. She had unearthed the terrifying truth, and in doing so, had not only brought justice to her brother, but also forged a new path for herself, a testament to the enduring power of love, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of what is right. The quiet small-town girl had faced down a powerful, corrupt system, and in the end, she had won.